The air above Delhi shimmers with heat. Dust curls around the domes of forgotten palaces, their marble faces scarred by time and conquest. Beneath them lie the bones of emperors who once ruled from the Khyber Pass to the Bay of Bengal. Men who built paradise on earth, then drowned it in blood. This was the Mughal Empire. For 3 centuries, the Mughals transformed India into one of the richest, most powerful civilizations the world had ever seen. They built cities that glittered like jewels, forged armies that shook kingdoms, and left behind art that outlived their names. But behind the silk and gold lay obsession, betrayal, and fire. The story of the Mughals isn't just about emperors. It's about the cost of greatness, how ambition turns vision into tyranny, how love becomes the seed of loss, and how even the grandest empires eventually collapse under the weight of their own beauty. From a Central Asian prince's desperate dream to the tragic fall of the last emperor, this is the rise and fall of India's dynasty of glory and bloodshed. It begins with loss. In the high valleys of Fergana, a boy king barely old enough to shave sits on a cracked throne, hearing the wind scrape against his palace walls. His name is Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur, descendant of conquerors, heir to nothing. At 13, Babur inherits a kingdom no larger than a county, hemmed in by traitors and mountains. His uncles circle like vultures, his own nobles whisper of replacing him. Each night, he sleeps with his sword beside him, dreaming not of feasts or poems, but of survival. Yet Babur carries something rarer than power: memory. In his veins runs the blood of Timur and Genghis Khan, men who bent continents to their will. He reads their stories and believes destiny is waiting just beyond the snow peaks. When Samarkand, the city of his ancestors, rebels, Babur marches with a ragged band to claim it. For 40 days he rules there, tasting the intoxicating air of legitimacy. Then, one dawn, he wakes to find the gates broken and the city lost. The boy who wanted to be Timur is once again an exile. He writes of this pain in his memoirs, the Baburnama. There is no joy in this world equal to the joy of conquest, and no grief equal to the loss of a beloved city. His words are sharp, unsparing, and strangely tender. They reveal a conqueror who also feels deeply. For years, Babur drifts across Central Asia like a shadow, raiding, bargaining, rebuilding. Each time he loses a city, he gathers his few loyal men and begins again. The pattern is cruel but instructive. Every failure hardens him. By the time he reaches Kabul, he is no longer the boy king. He is steel. Kabul becomes his refuge, his laboratory for empire. The valley's air is cool and clear, and from its hills Babur looks southward, to India. Traders speak of gold-lined markets, jeweled elephants, and palaces bursting with spices. To him, India is less a place than a promise, a chance to escape the cycle of loss. But conquest demands more than desire. It requires timing. In 1526, the Delhi Sultanate is a crumbling relic. Its ruler, Ibrahim Lodi, commands vast numbers but little loyalty. His nobles plot against him, his subjects resent his arrogance. Babur smells weakness. He gathers 12,000 men, Turks, Persians, Afghans, and mountain tribesmen bound by hunger and faith. They are not an army, they are a desperate gamble. What he brings instead of numbers are guns, Ottoman-style cannons, muskets, field tactics unknown in India. When his vanguard reaches the plains of Panipat, the morning mist hides an army 40 times larger waiting for them. The Sultan's war elephants shimmer with armor, drums thunder like an earthquake. Babur writes, "It was a day to test men's souls." He lines his artillery behind carts chained together, a wall of smoke and thunder. As the sun climbs, the air fills with sulfur. Each cannon roar throws the elephants into panic, crushing their own ranks. Dust turns the sky bronze. Arrows whistle like rain. By dusk, Ibrahim Lodi lies dead among thousands of his soldiers. Babur dismounts and walks across the field. Mud, blood, and broken banners beneath his boots. The wind stings his eyes. He kneels, not in triumph but exhaustion. God has given us victory. he writes that night, "yet my heart is heavy." The gates of Delhi open without resistance. Inside the ancient capital, the conqueror is greeted not with cheers but silence. The people have seen too many kings rise and fall. Babur rides through streets littered with the debris of forgotten dynasties. Still, he dreams. He orders gardens to be planted, Persian-style gardens divided by water and symmetry. He collects poets, scholars, and architects. In his letters, he writes of mangoes, monsoon clouds, and the strange music of Indian birds. The land unsettles and enchants him in equal measure. But his soldiers are restless. They long for the cool air of Kabul. Many see India as alien. Its heat, its faiths, its endless crowds. Rebellions flare. Conspiracies brew even among his kin. Babur knows the hardest conquest is not of cities, but of hearts. One night, as the story goes, he falls ill. The empire, still fragile, trembles at the thought of losing its founder. His son Humayun, barely a man, watches beside him. Babur, sensing death, prays aloud, "If a life must be given for Humayun's, let it be mine." By dawn, Babur's fever burns through him. Within days, he is gone. Humayun recovers. His body is carried back to Kabul, buried in the garden he loved most. Over his grave grows a cypress tree, reaching straight and solemn toward the sky. The empire he leaves behind is a skeleton wrapped in silk, powerful in name, fragile in bone, yet within it lies a seed that will one day bloom into the richest empire on earth. For now, India belongs to strangers with strange tongues, led by the ghost of a poet king who dreamed of paradise and left behind both sword and verse. And as the monsoon rains fall on Delhi's red walls, a young emperor stands alone on the palace terrace, Humayun, son of Babur, wondering how long dreams can survive the weight of inheritance. The empire Babur left was a map drawn in dust. His son, Humayun, inherited it the way a man inherits a storm, without shelter, without certainty. Enemies closed in, old allies vanished. Within a decade, the empire that had been won at Panipat slipped away. The Mughals were once again exiles, drifting across Persia's deserts like ghosts. When Humayun died, he left behind a 14-year-old boy with sharp eyes and a strange calm. Jalal-ud-Din Muhammad Akbar, Babur's grandson, was not yet literate, not yet tested, but in him flickered something that felt inevitable. He would not just rebuild an empire, he would redefine what an empire could be. The year was 1556. Delhi was a tinderbox. The Afghan warlord Hemu had seized the throne, and the Mughals were scattered. Akbar's regent, Bayram Khan, rode with the boy through smoke and chaos toward the plains of Panipat. Again that cursed field. History, it seemed, had a sense of humour. This time the Mughals won narrowly. Hemu fell with an arrow in his eye, and the boy emperor's name was shouted through the dust. Akbar, the Great! It was a prophecy spoken before it was true. For years, Bayram Khan ruled in his name. Akbar watched, learned, waited. He studied the art of patience, how to outlive rivals rather than outfight them. When he finally took power for himself, he dismissed his guardian with a quiet letter, not a sword. The regent rebelled. Akbar hunted him down, but when Bayram surrendered, the emperor bowed and forgave him. The man who could have been a tyrant chose something harder: mercy. Akbar's empire was a vast, volatile organism, stretching from the Hindu Kush to Bengal, peopled by Persians, Afghans, Rajputs, Bengalis, and 1,000 languages. Most rulers before him had seen such diversity as a threat. Akbar saw it as a challenge worth mastering. He abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims. He invited Hindu nobles into his court, not as vassals but as partners. He married Rajput princesses, not merely for politics, but to weave kinship across faiths. He built a new capital, Fatehpur Sikri, an architectural vision of harmony, where temples and mosques stood side by side, their domes catching the same sun. At night, Akbar would sit in his chamber, surrounded by philosophers, monks, Sufis, and Jesuit priests from Goa. They debated the nature of God, truth, and justice until dawn. The emperor listened, eyes half closed, hands folded. He created a new faith, Dini Ilahi, a blend of Islam, Hinduism, and reason. It had few followers, but its existence was a statement. No truth was so sacred it could not be questioned. This radical openness earned him both devotion and hatred. Conservative scholars called him a heretic. Some of his own generals plotted against him. Yet Akbar met rebellion the same way he met faith, with calm resolve and strategic brilliance. He rode at the head of his armies into Rajasthan, where the proud Rajput clans held their mountain forts like iron hearts. Siege after siege, he broke them, not to destroy, but to absorb. When the fortress of Chittorgarh fell, Akbar wept at the slaughter, then built monuments to the fallen as both warning and remembrance. Better to win hearts, he said, than to crush bodies. He moved east into Bengal, south into the Deccan. Each conquest expanded not only his realm, but his experiment in governance. The Mughal system he built, Mansabdari, was as intricate as it was elegant. Every noble, Hindu or Muslim, was ranked by merit and paid in land revenue. Corruption could be punished, but loyalty was rewarded lavishly. It was bureaucracy as art, and while soldiers fought, builders worked. Akbar's cities glowed red in the sunset. The sandstone palaces of Agra and Sikri, their carvings a fusion of Persian curves and Indian flourishes. In their halls, poets composed in Persian, Hindi, and Urdu, languages that melted together under his reign. Painters filled manuscripts with colors that seemed to breathe, but even emperors are haunted. In his later years, Akbar's idealism began to fray. His sons grew restless, spoiled by luxury and power. His eldest, Salim, later known as Jahangir, drank deeply and rebelled openly. The court whispered that the prince plotted to seize the throne. Akbar, once the forgiving father of an empire, faced his own child as an enemy. For months, India teetered on the edge of civil war. Then, just as suddenly, Salim surrendered. The father embraced the son, but something in Akbar dimmed. Perhaps he saw in that rebellion the truth every empire must face. You can conquer land and hearts, but not time. Akbar died in 1605, in the same palace where he had dreamed of uniting the world. At his funeral, the people of India, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, mourned together. His tomb at Sikandra rose in serene balance. Neither holy mosque nor temple, but something between, something human. His vision outlived him. It lingered in the administration he built, in the language he nurtured, in the tolerance he preached. Yet as every empire learns, ideals are fragile inheritances. His successors would inherit his throne, but not his restraint. As twilight settles over Fatehpur Sikri, the red stones glow with fading warmth. Birds circle the empty courtyards where philosophers once argued about God. The city feels like a question left unanswered. Can power and compassion ever share the same body for long? The answer, as history soon shows, would not be kind. For in the next generation, love would return to the Mughal throne, and with it, the seeds of decay. The empire Akbar built did not end with his death. It inhaled, trembled, and exhaled again through his son, Prince Salim, now Emperor Jahangir. His name meant conqueror of the world. Yet for all his father's vision, Jahangir's war was not with empires. It was with himself. When Jahangir took the throne in 1605, the Mughal Empire stood at its zenith. Its armies were undefeated, its treasury overflowing, its cities shining like embers in twilight. But behind the splendor, the new emperor carried old wounds. He had rebelled against his father. He had betrayed, forgiven, and been forgiven in turn. The crown felt heavy, gilded with guilt. Jahangir's rule began with a declaration: justice above all. He hung a golden chain outside his palace gates, so any subject, rich or poor, could pull it to summon the emperor himself. He prided himself on fairness, and for a time, the empire believed him. But power is a lonely companion. Jahangir sought solace in art, in wine, in the quiet company of painters and poets. He adored the scent of jasmine, the sound of sitar, the play of light on marble courtyards. He turned governance into ritual, each morning weighed against gold, each evening drowned in wine. The court chroniclers wrote that Jahangir's eyes held a strange duality, kindness and distance. His temper was swift, his remorse immediate. He could execute a man before breakfast and pardon his family by lunch. And then, into that world of silk, intoxication and self-doubt, walked a woman who would change everything. Her name was Merun Nissa, sun among women, but history remembers her as Nur Jahan, light of the world. She was no ordinary consort. Born to Persian nobles who had fled to India in search of fortune, she had known poverty, marriage, widowhood, and survival. Her beauty was legendary, but her mind was sharper still. When Jahangir met her, the emperor who commanded millions found himself disarmed. They married in 1611. From that day, the empire began to revolve around her. She sat beside Jahangir during audiences, signed royal decrees with her own seal, and issued coins in her name. Poets praised her as co-sovereign. Merchants feared her judgment. Generals courted her favor. In her, Jahangir found the discipline he lacked. In him, she found the throne her ambition deserved. Together, they ruled as a single flame. Brilliant, dangerous, inseparable. For a time, the empire seemed to glow. Nur Jahan's influence brought refinement to Mughal art and architecture. She commissioned gardens, jeweled palaces, and a style of dress that blended Persian grace with Indian flourish. Under her watch, the Mughal court became a mirror of her taste. Elegant, exacting, and alive with color. But not everyone admired the light she cast. Nobles resented her authority. Princes whispered that the emperor was her puppet. Her enemies called her manipulative, power-hungry, even cursed. Yet Nur Jahan navigated court politics with the same precision as her embroidery. Each thread purposeful, each silence strategic. When Jahangir's health began to falter, ravaged by addiction and age, Nur Jahan ruled more openly. She handled petitions, led negotiations, commanded troops. When rebels rose in Bengal and the Deccan, her orders crushed them before the emperor's seal could dry. Even the British East India Company, newly creeping into India's ports, wrote home about the formidable woman who governs all affairs of state. Yet love, even when powerful, is mortal. Jahangir's sons, the next heirs to the empire, saw Nur Jahan's dominance as theft. Prince Khurram, later known as Shah Jahan, once her ally, turned against her. Faction war broke out within the palace. Generals chose sides. Bribes and betrayals became daily currency. The empire's pulse began to stutter. When Jahangir set out to quell rebellions in Kashmir, age caught up with him. His health failed among the mountains. And one cold October night in 1627, the emperor who had once chained justice to his gates slipped quietly into death. They carried his body back to Lahore, across rivers and valleys that echoed with prayers and weeping. His tomb, built by Nur Jahan, still stands in tranquil beauty, a garden of stone and silence, where peacocks sometimes wander between marble arches. But for Nur Jahan, the empire ended there. Shah Jahan seized the throne, ensuring her exile from court. The woman who had ruled half the world retired to a modest house in Lahore, her power stripped, but her dignity intact. She spent her last years designing gardens, writing poetry, and tending Jahangir's tomb. Her light dimmed, but never went out. When she died, her epitaph read simply, "At last, the light of the world rests here." Their love story remains one of history's strange paradoxes. Passion intertwined with politics, tenderness bound to ambition. They had ruled together in a world built on swords and suspicion, and for a brief, dazzling moment, had turned empire into intimacy. But empires built on emotion rarely endure. Nur Jahan's fall left a vacuum, a silence soon filled by the thunder of marble and war. For her stepson Shah Jahan would take the throne next, and from his love would rise the most beautiful building on earth. Yet beauty, as the Mughals would learn again, carries its own curse. When the throne changed hands, the court held its breath. The empire that had been a careful experiment in tolerance and balance now turned toward a different obsession: perfection. Prince Khurram, the boy once protected by Nur Jahan's web of influence, became Shah Jahan, king of the world. He arrived to power with the swagger of a warrior and the eye of an artist. He was as comfortable on the battlefield as he was in a workshop where artisans bent gold and stone to their will. Under him, the Mughal court would reach a new peak of magnificence. Yet even as marble rose and gardens bloomed, shadows gathered in halls no candle could fully brighten. The transition to Shah Jahan was violent in both politics and emotion. Nur Jahan, the woman who had steered Jahangir's twilight years, had already been pushed aside. Shah Jahan, resenting the influence the late empress once wielded, made sure her network faded from court. He consolidated power with an iron hand. Ministers and nobles who stood in the way found themselves stripped of rank, exiled, or quietly removed. He was ruthless when he needed to be, but his ruthlessness was a tool directed at a single aim: the absolute control of taste and state. His reign began with war. Provinces that had simmered under Jahangir's tolerant oversight now tested the new emperor's resolve. Shah Jahan rode into campaigns with banners snapping, using force to bind rebellious nobles and fractious regions into an unmistakable center. When the guns fell silent, he turned the empire's energy inward, into architecture, patronage, and an almost religious devotion to beauty. It's impossible to think of Shah Jahan without thinking of the Taj Mahal. But the story is more than a love poem etched in white marble. It is the expression of a mind that believed permanence could be purchased with perfection. When Mumtaz Mahal, his beloved queen, died in 1631, giving birth to their 14th child, Shah Jahan did not simply grieve. He decided to build a tomb that would stop time. A monument to love so immaculate the world would remember both builder and beloved in a single breath. From the first cartload of marble to the final inlay, the Taj was Shah Jahan's obsession. He drew craftsmen from Persia, Central Asia, and every corner of India. Calligraphers bent the black stone into verses that would whisper across centuries. Pietra dura artists set semi-precious stones into floral patterns that tricked the eye into living color. Workers labored for years, and the sound of chisels was a new background to Agra's afternoons. Architects argued, revised, and argued again until the geometry satisfied a ruler who refused compromise. The result was a perfection designed to outlast kings: domes that balanced like held breaths, minarets that rose as pillars of prayer, a reflecting pool that multiplied whiteness until the building seemed doubled. Unreality mirrored by water, the Taj was a cathedral of symmetry, a poem in stone that made people step back and begin to measure the world by new standards. Shah Jahan walked its terraces the way a painter studies a canvas. For him, the tomb was salvation and an ethic. An empire that built such beauty could not be questioned, or so he believed. Yet even as the Taj rose from the riverbank, other projects multiplied. Shah Jahan refashioned Delhi. He made it into Shah Jahanabad, a city of canals and bazaars, of proud mosques and the Red Fort, a palace city whose ramparts announced Mughal permanence to anyone who approached. Agra became a place of marble and red sandstone grace. Lahore gleamed with new pavilions. The empire's wealth flowed like light into architecture, and the court's treasury swelled even as it emptied for art. This is where the contradiction appears. The same appetite for beauty that gave the empire masterpieces also hollowed it. Cities cost money, wars cost men, palaces cost the labor of thousands. The Mughal state relied on central control, taxes, revenue collection, and nobles who could be trusted to administer. Shah Jahan's projects demanded steady revenue, and to sustain them, he tightened the fiscal reins. He insisted on efficiency, but machines of state depend on goodwill. Peasants felt increased levies. Zamindars chafed under stricter supervision. Small chasms appeared between crown and countryside, between court and provinces. Family life, once the engine of court alliances, became another fault line. Shah Jahan's sons were not children content to wait. Dara Shikoh, the eldest, was scholarly and mystical, a man who loved Sufi texts and philosophy. Shuja was the diplomat. Aurangzeb was the soldier, austere, devout, and wary of the court's soft lights. Murad and Shah Shuja, lesser princes, nursed their grievances. Beneath silk and jewels, ambitions smouldered like coal in a hearth, waiting for wind. Shah Jahan, despite his devotion to detail, proved blind to the slow rot that personal rivalries can eat into an empire. His favouring of Dara Shikoh, both for his intellect and for being the firstborn, set a dangerous precedent. Dara, though beloved by his father, lacked the iron will and tactical genius some in the court feared would be necessary when the empire hardened. Aurangzeb, meanwhile, watched and planned. He cultivated the orthodox clergy, the ulama, and soldiers who loved strict discipline. He used piety as a banner to gather those who disliked the court's extravagances. The inevitable rupture came like a dam breaking. In 1657, Shah Jahan fell ill. The illness precipitated a scramble for succession that would turn the empire into a stage for civil war. Princes moved armies, courtiers pledged allegiance to the rising victor, and the heart of the Mughal state, its capital and treasury, became the prize. Aurangzeb moved swift and merciless. He seized strategic forts and cut supply lines. Dara, who had been the center of a fragile coalition of intellectuals and moderate nobles, found himself isolated. Battles were fought not only with swords and cannon, but with promises, marriages, and propaganda. Regional governors switched sides, markets paused. Peasants watched with the knowledge that civil war often meant famine. When the fighting ended, Aurangzeb sat on the throne. He had one of the most startling transformations in Mughal history. An empire birthed in syncretic tolerance, now helmed by a ruler of unbending orthodoxy. Aurangzeb's rise marked the end of Shah Jahan's era not only politically but philosophically. The court of marble and poetry gave way to a court shaped by moral rigor and military discipline. But what of Shah Jahan in defeat? The man who had measured his life in gardens and stones found himself betrayed by the very game of dynastic politics he had ignored. Aurangzeb placed his father under house arrest in the Red Fort. For 8 long years, Shah Jahan lived in a shadowed pavilion. His days shortened and his vision narrowed to the view of the Yamuna and the distant gleam of the Taj, a monument he had built to eternalize love, now becoming a pain, through which he watched his own decline. Imprisoned, Shah Jahan's world shrank to memory. He wandered the fort's corridors, touching marble columns whose patterns once thrilled him. He asked to see the Taj one last time, and the guards obliged. From an elevated window, the old emperor watched the white dome glow in the morning, reflected in the river. He wept, not for ambition but for something quieter, the understanding that permanence is a human vanity. Even the finest stone cannot secure the hearts of men. There is a cruel symmetry here. Shah Jahan, who believed beauty could transfix and therefore secure, learned that obsession with perfection makes states brittle. Grand projects can distract an elite and bleed resources while the gears of governance seize. His taste for absolute aesthetics created a court of splendor, but also a culture that could not easily adapt when harsh politics returned. When Aurangzeb tightened the reins with orthodoxy and relentless campaigns in the Deccan, the Mughal center was forced into choices Shah Jahan's sensibilities would have found unbearable. Yet the legacy of Shah Jahan is not merely a parable of decline. The culture he curated, architecture, poetry, painting, and a refined court life, stamped India for centuries. The Taj Mahal remained, as intended, a global wonder. Shah Jahanabad's bazaars would hum with life through generations. His era stands as the high water mark of Mughal aesthetic achievement, a period when the empire spoke to the world in stone, in cloth, in verse. In the end, Shah Jahan died quietly in 1666, still under house arrest. His body returned to the river and laid beside Mumtaz in the tomb he had built. The emperor who had tried to freeze love into marble now rests within it. His passing felt like the end of a sunset over an empire that would soon change its course. Not instantly, but irrevocably. The Mughal story continued, of course. Aurangzeb would stretch the empire to its greatest political extent, only to fray it with relentless campaigns and fractured legacies. But Shah Jahan's chapter is crucial. It shows how grandeur and fragility can be woven from the same thread. He gave India some of its most enduring monuments, and in doing so, taught an empire the cost of believing that beauty alone could rule men. When you stand before the Taj and feel the hush it brings, remember this: it is both a love letter and a caution. It shows what great power can create and what that same power can gamble away. The marble sings. The empire listens. And somewhere in the Red Fort, an aging emperor once listened back, learning that eternity can be both a gift and a sentence. The corridors of the Red Fort still echoed with Shah Jahan's footsteps when Aurangzeb, his third son, stepped forward. Where Shah Jahan had sought beauty, Aurangzeb sought order. Where the Taj Mahal whispered of love and eternity, Aurangzeb's banners declared obedience and discipline. The empire he inherited was vast, wealthy, and cultured, but also brittle, held together by the delicate threads of compromise and indulgence. Aurangzeb's rise was neither sudden nor subtle. Civil war with his brothers had torn the empire apart for years. Dara Shikoh, the eldest and favored, had been a man of letters and mysticism, but he lacked the ruthlessness to survive a world ruled by ambition and orthodox discipline. Shuja and Murid, each commanding factions of the army, fought briefly and were neutralized. Aurangzeb's military acumen, combined with his strategic patience, ensured that by 1659, the throne belonged to him alone. He ascended not as a conciliator, but as a reformer of a very particular kind, orthodox, unyielding, and uncompromising. The empire's vast Muslim, Hindu, and diverse regional populations now faced a ruler who judged not by compromise, but by strict adherence to his vision of Islamic law. Aurangzeb reinstated the jizya tax on non-Muslims, overturned policies of tolerance, and began a reign marked by campaigns of moral and political consolidation. Yet his early years were not just about decrees. He rode personally to suppress rebellions, particularly in the Deccan and Gujarat. Where Akbar had sought alliances with Rajputs, Aurangzeb waged relentless campaigns to crush dissent, forcing even long-standing allies to submit. The empire's borders expanded, but each conquest came at a cost: heavy taxation, conscription, and local resentment. The brilliance of Mughal administration, so meticulously crafted under Akbar and refined by Shah Jahan, now strained under the weight of constant military demands. Aurangzeb's personal austerity contrasted sharply with the lavish court of his father. He lived simply, prayed diligently, and eschewed the poetry, music, and gardens that had defined Shah Jahan's reign. Nobles found his court severe. Peasants saw strict law enforcement where once moderation had prevailed. His piety earned respect among the clergy and orthodox factions, but it also sowed seeds of division within an empire built on cultural and religious pluralism. The Deccan campaigns, lasting decades, became Aurangzeb's obsession. The Marathas, under Shivaji and later his successors, were relentless opponents. Aurangzeb's generals were skilled, but the terrain, guerrilla tactics, and local support frustrated even the emperor himself. As his forces marched further south, supply lines stretched, armies weakened, and administrative control thinned. In his pursuit of expansion and orthodoxy, the central authority grew harsher, and resentment deepened. Back in the north, court intrigue never ceased. Aurangzeb had imprisoned his father, executed or exiled his brothers, and kept his sons under watchful eyes. Yet he could not control the inevitabilities of dynastic ambition. Rebellions flared, alliances shifted, and provinces simmered with unrest. The empire's vastness, once a symbol of glory, became its vulnerability. Even as military campaigns consumed the treasury and manpower, Aurangzeb oversaw a regime of religious and social regulation. Temples were destroyed or taxed, Sufi orders were monitored, and public morality laws were enforced with severity. His reign was a paradox. The empire grew territorially to its greatest historical extent, yet culturally and administratively it fractured. Merchants, nobles, and provincial governors increasingly felt alienated, and the Mughal court lost much of its previous sophistication and balance. The human cost was immense. Armies marched for years in the Deccan. Peasant uprisings were crushed. Famine occasionally swept through regions neglected in favor of campaigns. Aurangzeb lived to see the empire stretched from Kashmir in the north to Tamil Nadu in the south. Yet he also witnessed the first cracks of decline. Authority became over-centralized, relying on fear rather than loyalty, and local rulers began to assert independence quietly as his focus remained on southern wars. Aurangzeb ruled for nearly 50 years, the longest of any Mughal emperor. He died in 1707, in his 80s, exhausted and increasingly isolated. He left behind an empire at its geographic peak, yet internally strained, culturally diminished, and politically fragile. His successors inherited a crown of gold and marble, but not the cohesion, tolerance, or administrative genius that had sustained previous Mughal rulers. The legacy of Aurangzeb is complex. To some, he was a pious and capable ruler, defending the empire's Islamic foundations and extending its boundaries. To others, he was the emperor whose rigid orthodoxy and relentless campaigns fractured the state, setting the stage for the empire's decline. His reign illustrates a fundamental tension of power. Expansion and discipline can achieve greatness, but they can also erode the very foundations they seek to strengthen. As the sun sets over the Red Fort, the echoes of Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb mingle in the marble halls. Each emperor left a mark, some of light, some of shadow. The Mughal Empire, born from Babur's ambition, rose to extraordinary heights, produced timeless art, monumental architecture, and complex governance, yet could not survive the tensions between tolerance and orthodoxy, love and ambition, beauty and rigidity. When the British arrived a century later, they found an empire of immense wealth and sophistication, but one whose internal fractures were already ancient. The Mughals' glory had been vast, their bloodshed inevitable, and through it all, the lessons of power, vision, and hubris endure. Written in stone, echoed in courtyards, and whispered through history. Aurangzeb's death in 1707 left the Mughal throne vacant, but the empire fragile. The territory he had expanded to its greatest reach, from the mountains of Kashmir to the Deccan plateaus, now stretched like a map pulled too tight. Administrators, soldiers, and provincial rulers had served under his iron hand, but the bonds of loyalty were shallow. The glue of fear and rigid orthodoxy could not hold indefinitely. Immediately, succession disputes erupted among Aurangzeb's surviving sons. Prince Muhammad Azam, Prince Muhammad Kambakhsh, and Prince Bahadur Shah fought for supremacy. Civil war, though shorter than the battles between Shah Jahan's sons, left the core of the empire weakened. Provinces that had once paid taxes dutifully began to assert autonomy. Governors in Bengal, Awadh, and the Deccan saw opportunity in the confusion, carving out power for themselves. Beyond the throne, the Mughal bureaucracy showed signs of rot. The central treasury, once overflowing with revenue from agriculture, trade, and tribute, struggled to fund both administration and defense. Corruption spread as local officials diverted resources. Trade routes, once tightly secured by Akbar and Shah Jahan, became increasingly vulnerable to banditry and regional conflict. The Mughal army, formidable under Aurangzeb's personal leadership, gradually lost cohesion, relying on mercenary and provincial levies whose allegiance was fickle. Meanwhile, cultural brilliance, the hallmark of the dynasty, waned. The courts of Delhi and Agra no longer shone with the same artistry and patronage. Painters, poets, and architects continued to work, but under the pressure of declining resources and political instability, Their creations could not match the innovation of Akbar's or Shah Jahan's courts. The Taj Mahal and Red Fort remained monuments to past grandeur, silent witnesses to the empire's slow unraveling. Externally, new forces pressed the Mughals. The Marathas, long opposed by Aurangzeb, expanded aggressively in central India, exacting tribute and challenging Mughal authority. In the north, the Sikhs under Guru Gobind Singh asserted themselves, resisting Mughal taxation and interference. Meanwhile, European powers, the British, French, and Portuguese, increased trade influence along India's coasts, setting the stage for political entanglement that the weakened empire could not counterbalance. The 18th century saw the empire's authority fragment further. Provincial governors acted as kings in their own right, collecting taxes, maintaining armies, and negotiating with foreign powers independently. Delhi, once the heart of administration, became a symbol more than a functioning capital. Emperors remained on the throne, but their decrees often went unheeded beyond the city walls. The grandeur of imperial power persisted in ceremonies and courtly rituals, but practical governance had shifted to regional centers. Despite decline, the Mughal legacy endured in other ways. Architecture, literature, and the fusion of Persian and Indian culture continued to influence society. Cities like Lucknow, Jaipur, and Hyderabad carried forward the aesthetic sensibilities of the dynasty. The administrative systems Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan, and Akbar had developed laid a foundation for later governance, even if fractured, that would be observed and adapted by both regional powers and European colonizers. Religiously and socially, the empire's policies left a complex mark. Aurangzeb's orthodox measures created tension between communities that reverberated for generations. Yet the Mughal synthesis of art, literature, and governance had already created a cultural memory that survived beyond politics. In towns, villages, and courts, people remembered the festivals, gardens, and architectural marvels that had defined the empire's high points. Even as authority fractured, culture endured. By the mid-18th century, the Mughal emperor in Delhi was largely symbolic. Real power rested with regional rulers and emerging forces. The empire was a shadow of its former glory, yet its influence remained undeniable. Through literature, language, architecture, and culture, the imprint of the dynasty endured, reminding the subcontinent that even in decline, the Mughal vision had shaped the trajectory of India's history. The decline illustrates a fundamental truth about empires. Territorial expansion, centralization, and military conquest cannot alone guarantee longevity. Social cohesion, administrative foresight, and cultural inclusivity are equally essential. The Mughal Empire, vast and magnificent, faltered where its leaders became either overly rigid, as with Aurangzeb, or distracted by internal conflict, as with the succession crises. Yet even in decline, the dynasty's achievements in architecture, literature, and governance continue to influence the world, cementing their place in history. The story of the Mughal Empire is a tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and blood. From Babur's first triumph at Panipat in 1526 to Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the dynasty's narrative is one of conquest, governance, art, and human ambition, of ideals pursued with both courage and cruelty. Each emperor left a distinct mark, shaping India in ways both tangible and invisible. Babur, the founder, arrived as a young warrior with ambition and vision, carving a foothold in a land of kingdoms and shifting loyalties. He established a foundation that combined military prowess with administrative insight, planting seeds of an empire that would endure for 2 centuries. His victories were not merely about territory, they were about creating a framework for governance and a legacy of ambition. Akbar, his grandson, turned that framework into a flourishing civilization. His genius lay in synthesis, combining tolerance, strategic marriage alliances, and an effective bureaucracy to forge an empire resilient against internal and external pressures. Akbar's court was a center of intellectual and artistic achievement, and his policies of religious integration created a society where multiple communities could coexist under one imperial umbrella. The Mughal state under Akbar became a model of administrative efficiency and cultural innovation, and its lessons endured long after his death. Jahangir's reign showcased the delicate interplay of personal passion and imperial responsibility. Through his relationship with Nur Jahan, we see how love, ambition, and art shaped policy and culture. Nur Jahan's influence exemplifies the power that women could wield behind the throne, and her patronage left an indelible mark on Mughal culture, from architecture to fashion. Yet their story also highlights the fragility of personal influence and the ever-present tension between affection and authority. In a dynasty ruled by bloodlines, Shah Jahan's era represents the empire at its aesthetic peak. The construction of the Taj Mahal and other monumental works demonstrates the fusion of political authority and artistic vision. Yet even as marble and gardens reflected glory, the empire's reliance on centralized authority and immense expenditure foreshadowed the vulnerabilities that would later be exploited. Shah Jahan's fall, imprisoned by his own son Aurangzeb, shows how ambition and familial rivalry could reshape history, turning love into tragedy and genius into caution. Aurangzeb's reign, the longest of any Mughal emperor, pushed the empire to its geographic and administrative limits. His focus on orthodoxy and expansion brought short-term consolidation, but sowed the seeds of decline. His wars in the Deccan, his strict religious policies, and his suppression of dissent created fractures that would never fully heal. Aurangzeb's empire, while vast, became increasingly brittle, illustrating that the pursuit of absolute control and moral rigidity can undermine the very structures one seeks to preserve. The post-Aurangzeb decline shows the consequences of stretched resources, succession crises, and regional fragmentation. Provinces asserted independence, governors became de facto kings. Yet even as the Mughal political structure weakened, the dynasty's cultural, architectural, and administrative legacies continued to influence India. Its gardens, palaces, mosques, and literature created a cultural memory that survived the empire's fragmentation. The Mughal Empire teaches timeless lessons. Greatness is forged not only through conquest, but through vision, adaptability, and the delicate balancing of power, culture, and human relationships. Its story is a testament to the heights that can be reached through ambition and intelligence, and a warning of the vulnerabilities that unchecked rigidity, internal strife, and personal ambition can introduce today. When the sun sets over the Taj Mahal, Fatehpur Sikri, or the Red Fort, it illuminates more than stone and marble. It illuminates centuries of human aspiration, of rulers who dreamed of eternity, and of an empire that, though it fell, continues to echo through time. The Mughals' story is a mirror to the human condition. Glorious, tragic, and unforgettable, their glory, love, and bloodshed remain etched into the very fabric of India, reminding the world that history is not only a record of events, but a reflection of human ambition, creativity, and fallibility. And in those echoes, the Mughal dynasty lives forever.